Welcome to Finding the Frame. Joining me today are filmmakers Judy Becker and Lol Crawley, both Academy Award nominees this year for their exceptional work on The Brutalist. Judy, a multi-Oscar nominated production designer on American Hustle and Carol, and Lol, a cinematographer known for his bold atmospheric work on Vox Lux and The Childhood of a Leader, have crafted a film packed with architecture and emotion. Today, we're diving into their creative process, their collaboration, and the striking visual world that they've built. Judy, Lol, welcome to Finding the Frame. So, a little bit about, first of all, for an introduction, I just want to do a little bit of background on both of you for our followers. So what initially sparked your interest in visual storytelling? What was it that brought you to this? Were there any specific films, any photographers, any production designers or artists in general that really influenced your early development as a cinematographer and as a production designer? Lol, I'll come to you first.
Okay. Yeah, I grew up in Wales. And I very early on, I was kind of really into as a kid, I was really into these like REM videos, right? And there was I think the director was from Sheffield called Peter Kerr, I think. And they were very sort of like Super 80, kind of dreamy, kind of melancholic, sort of aching images that still kind of resonate. And then, also the work of like Robbie Mueller on, Paris, Texas specifically, and films like that. They all seem to have, well, a lot of them, interestingly, had this kind of like American iconography as well, and like sort of road movies. There was also a TV show called Road Dreams with this director, Elliot Bristow, that came out on Channel 4 when I was a kid. And it's interesting because when I finally got to shoot Ballast, which was my first film that I shot, I was in a car with a non-actor, sort of available light, handheld, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is it. This is the same thing. This is exactly, suddenly I'd come a full circle, and I was like, I know why I love doing this, because it all felt the same. So really it was whatever that is, that kind of a foot very firmly in the documentary and a responsive handheld camera that also tipped into this kind of dreamy, strange liminal space kind of feel. I think I'm still doing some of that in The Brutalist.
I'd say so. What about yourself, Judy?
I don't have as poetic a kind of timeline as Lowell. That was really nice to hear. I always loved art and interior design and my doll houses, and then drawing fantasy interiors. And then when I was a teen, and this was before I was like 10, and then as a teenager, I started to love movies, cinema. And then when I was in college, I heard about the fact that you could work in film, like as in the art department, and be a production designer. So I think it was like a domino effect, or a snowball effect. It all like started rolling, and each thing went on top of each other. And then when I found out about production design, I rolled towards that, but it took a while for it to happen. And I started at the bottom. And worked my way up to the top. But I think that all of my interests just coalesced into becoming that which I did not know existed until I was probably about to graduate from college.
Is there a specific part of the career that you enjoy the most? Is it the kind of like when you first get the script and you read through it and then you're sort of coming up with a lookbook or, ideas for what specific parts of the production design could look like? Is there something, that's something that you lean into, or is there other elements?
Yeah, I mean, that the creation of the visual world, like at that point, is something I enjoy a lot. Like that's maybe my favorite part. And sometimes I have to do that, before I'm meeting with the director. I used to do that, create this whole lookbook before I met with the director. But I think because of COVID and Zooms, it's like I get the script and then I'm meeting 2 days later, and I don't really have the time to do it in the way that I used to do it. because I used to have like a week, and then I'd go meet them in person, and I'd still stay up all night for a week and get this hard copy book together. It was really beautiful, and I still have them all. But now it's like maybe I can cobble together a digital presentation, but it still takes me so long to get it right that I usually don't. But after that, like the part I like the most is the whatever it is that we're doing. I like the collaboration, like whether I'm working with my art director, or a bunch of people, or the set crew, or the director. I love that aspect of creation. So whatever it is that except if we're sitting in a production meeting listening to stuff we don't have to listen to. Like, I don't enjoy that. Well, that's not really collaboration. That's like forced attendance.
I imagine with this film, because it was a $10 million budget and it had to be shot, and I think it was 33 days that I've read that it was shot. I imagine that those production meetings got pretty, financial, and pretty much breaking down. We can't do that because of this finance. We can't do that. Was that pretty much what you were having to sit through at times?
No.
I think when you get to the point of the 6 hour long production meeting or whatever, it's kind of very close to beginning. So it's really more just going through motivated by the schedule and the day out of day document, and just kind of like making sure that nothing's falling through the cracks, really.
Wasn't there like a day-long production meeting or something on The Brutalist?
I think they're generally
Brady likes
a
that,
very long
right?
time.
No, I think he asked for it. I was like, "Is this some Hungarian thing?" And he said, "No, it's me." Anyway, it is to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's the point of it, I guess, on a small
and,
movie
and
like this. I mean, on a big movie, I don't know.
Yeah, and to maybe it's maybe still a little late in the day, but there's still a little bit of flagging up, like, hey, I think this day now we're looking at it is not achievable, or do you know what I mean? I think it's like, hopefully there's not too many of those, but there's often 1 or 2 days where you're like, maybe we shift things around a bit or take the pressure off.
So going into that, then diving straight into the Brutalist, really, because of the time that we've got with you. What was it initially that drew you both to this project? What was it that drew you to this project, Lol? I know that you've worked with Brady on multiple projects now. Vox Lux, and also The Childhood of a Leader.
Yeah.
Fantastic film, by the way. What was it that drew you to this project? Besides, obviously, that working relationship, was there something that particularly spoke to you about the Brutalist?
Well, it's interesting. Someone asked me the other day. Well, actually, Robbie Mueller's wife asked me, do you say yes and then read the script, or do you read the script and then say yes? And I think it's an interesting question. I hadn't really been asked it, but I think with someone like Brady, you say yes. I mean, for me, you say yes and you read the script. Especially as you said, because we've had this sort of collaboration. But yeah, that in short, there's always I can feel that I'll I most of the time I believe I'll say yes, because he never makes a dull movie, like whether you like his movies or not. um they're always thought provoking. There's always something. It's the very reason I got into it, is to see a movie and then go to the pub afterwards or have a meal or whatever, and talk about this. And there's lots of themes and things that are open to interpretation, and just a very so of course I was fascinated by what he was trying to explore within this film. But I'm fully on board with everything he's done so far. It's like,
Yeah. Well, Judy as well. I saw an interview that you did at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival not long ago, and you talked about how it was awe-inspiring to work with Brady, and that was something that drew you to. Can you elaborate
Yeah,
on
I
that?
had
Tell us a
seen
little bit about.
seen Childhood of a Leader, and I had no idea that I knew Brady was an actor. I didn't know he had become a director. And when I saw the movie, I was just completely awestruck. And then I just couldn't believe. I thought it was an amazing movie, and I could tell that he was in full command of all the filmmaking skills you need to be a great director. And I really wanted to work with him. And I told my agent that. And then, and I kept pestering my agent. And the next project sounded great, Vox Lux, and I really wanted to do it, but he already had a designer. And I just kept up the pestering because I'm very director. In case you couldn't tell, I pick projects on the basis of the director. It doesn't mean I always get them, but that's what decides what project I take usually, unless I'm desperate for money, which has only happened a couple of times. And I mean that I've taken a project for money. I've been desperate for money a lot, but the times I've taken a project for money are few. So then eventually the Brutalist came about and opened up the position opened up, and I got a meeting and I got the job, and that's what led to working with Brady. And I would never, there's a director I want to work with. I don't care about the script. If I trust them as a filmmaker, the script doesn't matter. It could be a bad script, but I would assume they're going to make a good movie out of it, but this was a great script. So it was, without saying.
And can you let us could you let us in on what the process was like then, what his vision was for the film, what he discussed with you in those initial meetings?
I don't remember. I mean, I really don't. I don't remember the initial meeting, where the one, but I do remember that the second meeting where I already had the job. He asked me to design the institute because we had discussed building parts of the institute and finding locations to place some of the institute. So, and he wanted to show the producers how that would be done. And in order to do that, we needed to know what the institute looked like. So that was the first thing I did before the movie went into pre-production, or would have gone into pre-production before it pushed a year and a half, which it did at that point. But so the first thing I did was design the institute.
And I read that you're a big fan of brutalism prior to this movie as well, right?
Yes, definitely true.
Yeah.
Someone even dug up my Instagram bio, which God knows when I created that. I guess it was like 13, 14, 15 years ago, which
must have been premonition.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was, I don't know I guess it said, it's not all about brutalism. It's my black cat too, or something like that. So yeah, brutalism has always been there in any of my social media. I had Facebook for like a year until it broke up one of my close friendships. And I mentioned brutalism on that too. So yeah, always been a fan.
Lol, coming back to you, in terms of filming, this brutalist architecture and trying to capture that and, for the visual language of the film, how did you decide upon VistaVision? How did you decide upon, I imagine it because of the large format in terms of shooting these brutalist architecture, but could you let us in on that and that discussion with Brady early on?
Yeah, I mean, it was really motivated by this desire to shoot on a larger film format. Brady and I had shot film across the three movies, or the previous two movies rather. And the great thing is that those discussions have those arguments have already been won. It's not like, I come on board and then there's this whole discussion about shooting film and every night we have to have a breakdown of how much we'd shot, and it's like the most boring thing you want, it's like, so that was good. I mean, really, Brady was like, it was twofold. He was like, okay, the large part of the movie takes place in the 1950s. I want to let's look at using a camera system from that time, which of course, if you look at some of the films of Hitchcock that were shot with VistaVision, made a lot of sense. And then also, it's the original sort of full frame 35 mil, like a stills camera, right? It pulls the neg through horizontally rather than vertically. So you end up with twice the neg area. And as a consequence, you then end up with a wider field of view because the neg area is larger. And therefore, if you have a wider field of view, you're not forced on to use a wider angle lens to achieve that. And therefore it becomes the sort of truth of the buildings, or the architecture is not distorted. The lines are less distorted, because of that. And so, what was interesting was that, like, I felt that the VistaVision really earned its place, and there was a solid philosophy as to why to use it, rather than it being a sort of affectation or anything like that, or a gimmick. So it made perfect sense. I'd never shot VistaVision, and when I did the first test at Pinewood, and I compared 16 and 3perf 35 and VistaVision, it made perfect sense. Suddenly there was the increased field of view was immediate.
One of the things that really stuck out in the film actually was it wasn't just necessarily these shots of the institute and these beautiful shots of the buildings and stuff. It was also those very intimate shots with Laszlo and Erzsébet. Those shots really did kind of stand out beautifully in the VistaVision as well. You know what I mean? Those were
Yeah, I
stunning.
mean, I think there is if people have said that the film has a certain grandeur, even outside of the obvious, the images that obviously fall into that, the Carrera marble quarries and the institute itself, and those things. I think one of the things that VistaVision does is it allows you to connect with the performance and also celebrate the space at the same time, and the best versions of film historically have done that. That's what people said, decades ago. I mean, it's changed, I think, because of the way that the language of television has changed, but it always was that, like, TV was about this, and then cinema was about having a much bigger frame, and I think we've been able to do that. We've been able to sort of celebrate the design and the spaces that Judy has constructed, or so I think it's successful in that regard. We're avoiding a sort of televisual close up. We're avoiding over covering the scenes, and we're sort of celebrating both the space and the performance.
Yeah. You talked about Judy's space there. Judy, if I could come to you, brutalism is often seen as stark and imposing, and it's sometimes can be seen as a backdrop. It became a character in this film. I wonder if you could speak to that. I mean, translating that into film and how it became, conveyed the emotions of the characters, and pretty much, the characters themselves were represented in the buildings
Well,
also. Do you know?
I mean, it became a character because it is representative of a lot within Laszlo in that sense. So, and it represents a lot about Laszlo. I think it is stark, I suppose, and in this case, imposing. It's a very, very large brutalist building, and it's a pretty extreme example of brutalism in a sense, because it often there are not historical decorative details in a brutalist building, such as columns or uh, other Greco-Roman details like they have in fascist architecture. But in other ways, but there are other kinds of details. Like if you look at Paul Rudolph's buildings, or there will be a lot of jutting balconies or windows, and the Institute has like no windows or very few windows and very few apertures of any kind, and it has smokestacks that are church towers, and it really looks like a gigantic crematorium, which is what I intended. And it's almost I've been thinking of it because I think everything is, has multiple interpretations and is open for interpretation. But when I was designing it, I did think of it as a factory slash crematorium institute, and I was looking at a lot of in thinking about incorporating the Holocaust and the concentration camps. I was thinking a lot about the crematoriums and how it's a church, it's a crematorium disguised within a church, and it's a subversive design that Laszlo is giving to Harrison in a sense. I'm so sorry because I kind of forgot the actual question you asked me, which was, I think it's a very personal to Laszlo, this building, and it's also very subversive, and it's a little bit of Harrison being a kind of a fool in the sense of if you tell Harrison it's beautiful or it's fashionable or this guy is talented, he will believe it. I don't think that he has, like many people, does he have taste? Yeah, if someone tells him that this is beautiful. And so it's a little, it's not emperor's new clothes, and I can't think of the right expression for, he'll buy it because someone told him it's great. And I think that Lajlo is, in a sense, really doing a number on Harrison in order to get his building built. And that building is incredibly personal to him, because it is a testament to what he went through. And it's also what he and Erzsébet went through. And it's also a way of erasing that past and looking forward, which I think is something that brutalism as an architectural school does. And because it's devoid of historical reference and started after the war, as did other very innovative forms like abstract expressionism and painting. And I think that that's great. I mean, I think it's great. I think art should look forward. So that's something I really like about it.
Was there something that you brought from? I'm not sure whether it was at what point this interview was, but there was an interview that I read that you were talking about from back home, from when you were younger. There was a synagogue
Yeah,
that was built in the shape.
of a Star of
Do you know
David.
where I'm going with
Yeah.
that?
Well, I was trying to incorporate some kind of when I was thinking about trying to incorporate the concentration camps and also trying to incorporate some kind of subversive symbolism, I thought about this synagogue that was in the town I grew up in New York, and outside of the city, New York City. And I knew I had never been in this, have never been in this synagogue, but my mother told me it was in the shape of a Star of David, but you could only tell from above. You couldn't tell from the ground. And I think I've seen it from the outside. I'm actually at this point not sure what I've seen and haven't seen because I've now seen a lot of pictures of it. So it could be a false memory, but you can't tell from the outside. It looks like some jagged white, walls, but from above, you can see that it's in the shape of a Star of David. And I've always loved that idea since I was a kid that of these hidden, it's like an Easter egg, in architecture, but
Yeah,
that term didn't exist when I was a kid, not in that way. So I
and it's been ruined by Marvel films as well.
Totally. So
Easter egg.
100%
Yeah,
ruined in every way. So, except for kids maybe hunting for them. So,
yeah.
on Easter. And, so I ultimately could not figure out a way to incorporate a Star of David into the building. And I did incorporate, though, a lot of crosses almost in a, like, you wanted a church? I'm giving you a church, but it also references a concentration camp. But but I did explore that a lot, and I also found out recently while doing press for this movie that synagogue was designed by Marcel Breuer, which I didn't know. So it was quite apt, really.
Yeah. And Lol, coming back to you in terms of shooting these fantastic, places, one of the things that stuck out to me from Childhood of a Leader was you were shooting, with these. You frame the protagonist against these sort of cavernous spaces, to make them seem isolated and to show that growing power of this child turned into almost fascistic. Forgive me if you don't agree with me on that. That's something that I thought I saw within that. Was that something that you tried to do with this? You tried to use the framing of these different architectural places against the character. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I mean, you know, I think the sort of the I think it comes back in some ways to this idea of celebrating both the space and the person as well. So it's not always that intentional or that I mean, there are certain points, of course, like where when you see all three figures finally, there's a moment that we shot this VistaVision frame in Carrera, and you see this beautiful marble, you're in a cave and you see this beautiful like wall of marble with all its incredible colors and oranges and all these different beautiful hues, and then you don't really have any sense of scale until three people kind of emerge, silhouetted against it, and I think that was very much a sort of intentional. It's almost like a sort of this cathedral, this huge space, and we really wanted that contrast and that idea of kind of like, you know, slightly kind of like, yep, what's the word? Kind of like, yeah, just a real moment of awe, but kind of disorientating the audience in terms of scale, at least. You know what I mean? In those
Yeah.
moments. So yeah,
Almost juxtaposing, I suppose, right? In terms of
yeah,
the
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I plan a lot with Brady in terms of like shot listing and exploring the spaces, but we don't shot list a great deal. We shot listed one scene of the movie and stuff. So a lot of the time it is a kind of like just a response to the space, and we're finding moments like we work in a traditional way of blocking the scenes, and then and then it's a discussion about um what the coverage is, and to be honest, it's quite minimal, the coverage with Brady. And so a lot of the times, like, I suppose it's talking about it now, but if the coverage is minimal, you don't really want to be looking just at the faces, you know what I mean? If it's one or two shots, you have to be able to incorporate the space within those moments as well.
So yeah, keep it on with this. Was there a moment where it was you felt that these concrete textures and this rigid geometry became more challenging to light or to frame, or was it just something that you and Brady going through? And this is to you, Lol. Sorry, that you
Mm.
were going through these. Like when you were doing your composition and your shot talks and everything like that. You just said this looks like a really good shot. This is what we'll do. I know that a lot of it was handheld as well, so perhaps there was a lot of
Yeah.
movement within that.
Yeah, it's sort of I mean, this film is a balance between the kind of formalism. I mean, certainly those a lot of the scenes where you're with Van Buren, he almost dictates this kind of like stillness to the camera. There's a relationship between the two of them, of course, which is, which isn't relaxed and informal most of the time. There are conversations where they kind of connect, but there's let's make no mistake, there's a power play, by the very nature of what their relationship is. However, there are certain points, where they're celebrating the commission of the library early on. It's a very intimate moment where they're sort of relaxed in the apartment together, and it's handheld, and it's a completely different feel. So I think the movie kind of like vacillates between these two modes in many regards, in terms of the language. Yeah, does that answer the question?
Yeah, was that something that, just as a follow-up to that, was
Mm,
that something that you were trying that you and Brady discussed in terms of we'll go handheld on certain bits to show, to convey that emotion of things? But I'm thinking about
yeah.
the final scene, not that I'm trying to be a spoiler alert for anybody or anything like this, but
Mm,
not the final scene, should I say, the scene where Esbeth um
accuse-
accuses Van
yeah.
Buren of being a rapist.
Well,
That moment seemed to go into handheld, and then there
uh,
was moments of steadiness. You know what I mean?
That's yeah. Well, I'm glad you pick up on that and recognize that, because that there, it for me, working with Brady, like, sometimes it's this kind of evolutionary thing where we kind of, amongst the heads of department, and we sort of start here and arrive up here somewhere. Other times, in terms of the language, he has a very, without being sort of dogmatic, he has a very clear idea of, like, of what he wants and how he wants the language of that scene, to be. So, for example, with that one, he said, "Okay, I want it all to be in one shot, because it is all one take that barely fits on a roll of film. It's one Steadicam shot." But then he said, "I want it to go from Steadicam to handheld, and then to Steadicam, but without cutting or using a different technique." So I was like, "Huh, okay, well, that's a new one." And so really, it was a case of our operator, Attila Pfeffer. I've never seen anybody do this, but literally take the Steadicam rig and then kind of almost handhold the camera with the Steadicam hanging off it. It's kind of like, he physically just kind of like it was extraordinary. He was just, so then he was, and then he put it back to, the camera righted itself, and then it was back into traditional Steadicam mode, following Joe Alwyn as he races up and down the staircase. So
Brave, I imagine, whilst using VistaVision.
Yeah. Well, I think actually that was we used VistaVision on the Steadicam, um, but unfortunately for that scene, because the scene was so long, we had to shoot that on another 35mm system because it was a 5-minute take, and we couldn't shoot 1,000-foot mag because of the sheer size. So that was a rarity where we lent into it. But yeah, so Brady's always been like that. There were scenes in Childhood of a Leader where he was like, it's just one shot. And I remember questioning or asking the question early on with Childhood, and Brady said, I only ever want to cut to another shot if it gives the audience more information. you know and it is a bit like this idea that every cut is a lie. Like in those moments you almost want the audience to be, I mean, you'd have to ask Brady about, but my take on it is that you kind of like you want the audience to be completely locked into the emotion of this moment, and so it's not like kind of. I sometimes find some movies when they try to do these audacious wanners, I'm kind of like, I feel like that's more about the filmmakers than the film. You know what I mean? That's the danger, is that it becomes a little bit of a gimmick. I don't feel that whenever Brady suggests that, I always feel like it's really motivated by the story.
Yeah, just to tack onto that as well, I'd say that that's very effective in Vox Lux, where you have these longer tracking shots, and also where is it in the concert moments where you actually feel like you're part of the audience, and it's a bit
Right.
more disorientating when you're going through the crowd. That
Yes.
really is effective, and you can see that it's been used really, really well. Coming back to you, Judy, did you experiment with materials and like, were there different surfaces, different finishes, different props, different things that you wanted to put in to sort of offset or counterbalance the starkness of the architecture of brutalism, or what
Not
was
on
it?
purpose. No, I knew. Well, it's no. I mean, no. Um, I think that we did use other materials on the construction site, and maybe some of it was to soften it a bit or to give. It wasn't because it was brutalism. I think it was more to give a bit of realism to the construction site. I think, and of course, it wasn't, most of what we had there wasn't real concrete, it was painted foam. So, maybe to help it look realer, we used a lot of canvases and tarps, and it also adds some volume to the space. So we did use a lot of it, and I would say most of it was to in the spirit of achieving naturalism as opposed to just mixing it up for texture's sake. But I had a lot of references of period construction sites. I had a really great book called Building Brasilia, which was about the construction of Brasilia in Brazil in the 1950s. And there's so many great ideas in there. Some of them we couldn't pull off just because of money and time and expansiveness. But there were some really great things. So there was a lot of stuff that we did on the construction site. And so there were a lot of, I guess there were some assorted textures that we added to it, but it was more for um, trying to give it the feel that there was a lot going on and that there were people living there and there were different things happening, and sort of trying to give a sense of this expansive world of what was going on there.
Well, following up on that, with this being in various, because it takes place over multiple decades, and these spaces will obviously evolve visually over time. How did you approach that passage of time in terms of,
Very loosely. I mean, we did it very loosely, and we did have different areas that portrayed different stages of construction, but it wasn't too literal, because it wasn't shown literally, and it was more to give an idea of that there's these skeletal structures, there's these pillars, there's these entrances, there's a concrete foundation being made, but it's more, I think it's not a documentary about building a concrete building. So it was shot and also edited a little bit loosely. Um, and I would say almost in a I don't know what the right word is, impressionistic way. Um, and it could have been shot in a less impressionistic way, or edited in a less impressionistic way, but it was never meant to be boom, 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 like the 5 stages of construction of a brutalist building. It was always meant to give a feeling rather than an exact lesson in construction.
If I could make that probably tighten up that question then, like in terms of establishing a visual contrast between Laszlo's earlier work and what this one became, did you look into that? Do you think about? I mean, I don't know. When I look at the Biennale, the Venice
Uh,
festival towards the end, was there a way that you tried to show difference in the way that he'd evolved as an architect or
Yeah,
anything like
I
that?
don't think he did evolve very much, and I was aware of that. I think brutalism was very important to him, and this building represents who he is as an architect, the Institute. So he does evolve in the sense that th they soften a little bit, and they become commissions, right? So there are houses and museums, and I think a synagogue and a church, and they're not all as gigantic in scale, and they don't look like crematoriums. Um, and I just kept them all brutalist. I mean, I made one a little more postmodern looking because I was thinking of Philip Johnson and how he started out as this really beautiful international style architect, and then he totally like went in this bad direction with the postmodern architecture. So there's one that is more postmodern, but then I went back to the stark brutalism more, because there's some beautiful brutalist domestic architecture, mostly by Tario Ando, but I know some like East Coast of the United States architects that have designed in that style and gorgeous houses in Massachusetts. So I was really thinking like he doesn't deviate much because that style meant a lot to him emotionally. And also I had limited time to become another architect that did more, so, and I did those designs pretty quickly. So I just felt that he's a brutalist architect, and that's what people want from him, and that's what he's stuck with. So I think the earlier designs, the furniture and the library, are not typical of Laszlo. They're just showing that he's very skilled, and it's once he goes to the institute that he really it becomes Laszlo Toth as an architect.
Gotcha. In terms of right, so now that brings us nicely into this idea, the whole thing being shot in Hungary, and I'll come to you first, Lol. In terms of, how did you adapt to that? You're trying to present, real sort of America, Pittsburgh, in the 1950s, and you're filming it in Hungary. Were there any difficulties of doing that? Was there anything that you had to, any problems that you had trying to make that into America in the 1950s. I mean, I imagine shooting in Hungary is great for when you're shooting on VistaVision because it's got 2 film processing labs over there. You know what I mean? So that's wonderful. But yeah, in terms of shooting Hungary for America, did that present
Yeah.
you with any problems?
Well, I mean, it was. I think what the. I mean, I'm thinking about the furniture showroom specifically and things like that. I mean, I definitely think that Brady's spoken about the film owing a debt to a certain kind of like 1950s melodrama in some regards and things, and I think like there's a noirish quality. I mean, when you see the fabulous design of the showroom, and then you fill it with these incredible costumes and Emma Laird. I mean, it's straight out of like a movie of that era. So I mean, for me, it's less challenging, I suppose, because you know if the production design and the costumes and all of these elements come together, I wouldn't be shooting it remarkably different. I mean, I'm conscious and conscientious of the lighting, of course. Like in a scene like that, I mean, it's interesting because you look at it now and it does have this kind of noirish quality with the Venetian blinds, but my sort of you know as much as I was aware of the implication of that, there was a real practical desire because you couldn't see out of the windows, right? Because you would just see 21st century Budapest. Um, you know, if you put shears up at the window, it just becomes this very soft lighting that you're locked into. When you have those shears, you can, sorry, not the shears. When you have the blinds, you can adjust them. I mean, it was a very ambitious shot where you're interrogating everything, the whole entirety of the showroom, and then once we, you know, so we, you know, between Judy and I, we were like, okay, are you, you know, Judy, are you happy for that to be the aesthetic? Because that really helps for me. It helps me. It gives me somewhere to go and manipulate the light. And then as soon as, you know, once we'd lit it, it was like, oh, look at these beautiful kind of like shadows that were coming through, you know, from the HMIs outside and stuff. So, you know, it was like,
Were you using that kind of light in it? Like a lot of it seems like it's naturally lit for most of the film. Is that the case, or were you using a lot of artificial
well, I
light?
was always light. I mean, I say always lighting with a lot of the interiors, like where you're following, you know, if you, the dining room scenes, the party scenes, all of that Van Buren, there's always a light outside of the window, you know, pretty much. The library, of course, but I tend to light in quite a naturalistic way. And as you know, and I tend to, my lighting is informed by what was there. Like often, this isn't always the case, but often we'll turn up in a space and I'll do a light study, and I like spending time on my own, having at least one period where I'm there on my own without anybody else there. And some of my responsibilities or approach as a cinematographer is to be like, okay, they like this space, they like the way the light behaves in it. How do I then make that consistent to shoot a scene? So I'm kind of almost lighting it to replicate what the best version of how we found it, you know, of why the location was cast in the first place by Judy and location department and Brady.
Judy, in terms of, I'm thinking back to that library and the way that was lit and everything. Was that that was a real location? That wasn't a set or anything, was it? The
Oh,
library
it's a real
itself.
location. It was the conservatory in the mansion that we shot as Harrison's mansion. It's a glass. It was all glass, and it had no ceiling apertures, so that was all faked by myself and Lowell. And I keep forgetting about that we did that. And
Yeah, it was just it was. Sorry, I didn't mean
no, it's
to jump,
okay.
but it was a domed, like a vaulted
It
ceiling or
was
whatever.
vaulted,
You
but
know,
there was no opening up
yeah.
there.
No, but it meant that it's basically
Yeah,
provided it's like a studio in the sense that or like the gantries of a studio, because it gave me space to
yeah,
hide something, and you know, and it was
yeah,
perfect in that regard.
yeah,
I could put all the lights up there, and then Judy could put a false ceiling in with this
yeah.
concentric. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
the one that I think I might have been inspired by Terminal 5 at LAX by, but um, yeah, so we did we it was an empty room. It had a few dead plants in it, so we did the Art Deco version of it, and then then when Laszlo redesigns it, that version of it, and built all the old uh dome with the ugly stained glass, and then the new. I don't know if you really see there's this concentric ceiling piece. Yeah, so we did all of that. Yeah,
Wow, lol. When you shot that, I remember the shot itself. It's like this nice, beautiful shot when he moves
yeah.
the seat into the place. You're shooting that through the doors and everything like that. Was that a choice to have that almost framing it on either side?
Yeah, I'm definitely I'm a sucker for a frame within a frame every time. You know, like Hammer, you know, like Hammershoy has been an influence. Like I know Judy has used the painting as Hammershoy, and me also. But you know, like from like the very first things I shot, you know, like years, many years ago now, I've always been interested in sort of like a frame within a frame. And I think often there's this kind of there's like a respectful feel to it, in a sense that you're there, but I won't step into the room, I'll let him have this moment, you know. And I think, you know, I don't even kind of think consciously
Mhm.
about it, but I that's how I felt. I think that's what I was doing. I think that's what that that technique does, is to kind of almost imbue it with this sense of like, I'll let Laszlo have his moment alone.
I think it would have been so less powerful if you had stepped into it. I never even thought about that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It does. It feels like we're watching the artist create something.
yeah.
It's a beautiful moment. Yeah, I think that as well. It always. One of my favorite lines of the film is where this bloke steps in and says, "It's really good. The forced perspective's amazing." This random bloke just comes over and sort of says to Van Buren, "Oh, I really like this. It's really cool with the forced perspective." That's one of my favorite bits of the thing. You do the exact same, actually. I'm not that we're going to break down every scene, but you do the same when another frame within a frame is when we're watching them having a meal with Zsofia and her husband.
Ah,
You know what I mean? There's a moment
Yeah.
where you pull back and we're just watching them in this cramped little sort of
yeah.
kitchen area. It's beautiful.
I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes it's a marriage of necessity as well. I mean, like Judy knows this. I think I've said this before, but I come from a tradition of like non-actors, available light, real locations. Um, I don't always now work that way. Obviously, but I like the restrictions. Like I like being put into a space, and then they're like, "Well, can you film here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why not?" Like so. Then you put the 35 mm camera on a track, at the end of the corridor, and you watch it play out. And yeah, I think also when it's coming back to this idea of celebrating the space. If it had all just been in kind of like shot reverse shots, you wouldn't have seen it. But it also immediately shows you how small the spaces they're living in. By
Yeah.
doing that, I think.
That's actually, it brings me on to a question that I'd written down here, which was about, is there something like, because you're obviously taking that moment in that space, just like you just said there, was there a moment in the Brutalist for each of you? I'll come to you first, Judy, where it might not necessarily be technically as impressive as you wanted it to be or anything like that, but something that you find perfectly encapsulates the emotional and the thematic core of the film that you had?
Um, I mean, I really love the opening scene where Sophia's getting almost interrogated, and I think that scene gets overlooked in people's memories because it goes by really quickly, and then you're in. I think then you're in the boat, right, Lowell? It's this, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
which is really the kind of the beginning of the movie. But I designed that set. We built that set outside near another location, and I designed it very specifically for that, like in a very specific way. And I kind of, it was, I know it didn't come out exactly as I wanted, but very close. And I really like the way it looks in the movie. And I'm pretty, and so yeah, I do really like that set. And even though it's not perfect.
Yeah, and you mentioned there one of again, it's become the overriding symbol of the film. But Lol, coming to you now, I mean, I don't know if this was the moment that you were going to talk about that was, as I said, not necessarily as technically impressive as you'd like it to be, but certainly something that perfectly encapsulates the thematic core of the film. That scene with the Statue of Liberty and the emerging from the bowels of the ship, I suppose, and then coming upside down. I believe that was you who was going to be the person who actually shot that, right?
Yeah, both aspects. I mean, if that's what you're asking, I mean, I operated the A camera on throughout the movie, and then specifically the handheld. But then, that's all apparently like take five. That whole sequence in the boat, but is cut up, and sort of off. The image is also flipped by David Yanchko, our editor, and Brady to double down on this kind of disorientation. And then by the end of it, we're on the VistaVision shots of the statue, as you said, and that was kind of an evolution as well. Like I'd love to. I mean, I'd love to. I can just do this, but I really, I might go back to the script and just take one. I'd be interested to read the script again now. Because I haven't read the script in such a long time. So of course that was in there, but I'd be interested to know what the description was initially of the Statue of Liberty, because I know it was an evolutionary conversation. I mean, I had an idea at one point of like almost you're looking up and sort of completely contained within the robes of the Statue of Liberty, and then the camera would unfold, so it still have this tumbling, untethered quality, but you start to then reveal a little bit of the crown or a little bit of the face, and then it unveils itself as to what it is. So it was a similar. It was the idea was the same, or the intent was the same, but it evolved into this to what we did, into what we did, which was to film the Statue of Liberty, and then actually in post, a lot of that, because we shot high resolution, a lot of that image could be zoomed into and tumbled and untethered and actually, far more effective in terms of what it, what I believe it's trying to say, about the promise of what America can promise to an immigrant.
I have so much more I could talk to you guys about, and it's been such a pleasure. But one thing, in terms of, obviously this is a film school that we work for, Filmmakers Academy. We have lots of different filmmakers and everything like that. Is there a piece of advice that you would give to upcoming filmmakers and things like that? Judy, I in an interview I saw with you, there was a really good piece of advice that you gave that was talking about what was it? Work below your level. I think was the thing that you said, and it was a beautiful piece of advice. Is there any more advice or that kind of advice that you could elaborate on for us?
I mean, for people specifically that want to become production designers, I would say that you're going to need a source of inspiration within yourself and a source of ideas. And that has to come from some kind of lifelong interest in something that has to do with design, whether it's art or architecture or interior design or movies, something. And if you're not interested in those things, it's the wrong career for you. And I'm just saying that because I've met quite a few people that were studying production design that were not particularly interested in any of those components that make up your source of inspiration. So you have to have always been interested in things that make up where you get your ideas from. They don't just come from nowhere. They have to be within you. You have to have an imagination. You have to have a source of inspiration. You have to think about these things all the time. I think about them all the time not consciously. It's just part of my life, that I'm always thinking about visual things. That's what I enjoy. So if you don't feel that that's you, find another craft to go into. Maybe it's costume designing or maybe it's makeup, but you have to have that sort of source, found that library inside your head to be a production, and everything else can be learned on the job or at school, but the source of inspiration can't be learned. You have to have that already.
Absolutely. That's a great piece of advice. Thank you for that. And then, Lol, what about yourself? What advice would you give to these young, upcoming cinematographers? I listened to one interview of yours where you talked about a 14-year-old over in, I'm not sure where it was, but wanting to shoot VistaVision, and you were helping them. So I know that you've always helped a lot of young filmmakers through and to reach their dream and their goal. What advice would you give to upcoming filmmakers and to people who are watching this now?
I think it's similar to Judy. I mean, in the sense of have something to say. I mean, if you don't have your own personal take on it, and that comes from life experience, or wherever that comes from, for me the best the cinematographers I'm drawn to and admire. It's not about the technical. I mean, there's a lot of stuff technically you'll find now, especially on social media, and which is great, and it's an incredible resource, and it costs nothing. And I'm very, very grateful to to people doing that. But it it's like it's obsessing about the paintbrushes, not about the painting. Do you know what I mean? I think it's a means to an end. And if you don't have anything to say, the technical is purely the technical. And I think you can't you can't lose sight of that. That you have to have your own personal take and your own authorial voice. I guess it's the same. People have spoken about it for years or decades about auteur theory. It's not as I think that's its own thing, but I think there's definitely within being a practitioner, being a head of department, whether it's production designer or cinematographer, you do have a certain sort of authorial voice and something that links the films, something that you gravitate of why you chose certain films, and you have to recognize that, nurture that, and cherish that. Is what I would say.
That's a fabulous piece of advice. Guys, as I said, I could keep talking to you for ages, but we'd be here until well after the BAFTAs and the Academy Awards and everything like that. Good luck to you both with that. As I said, the awards are just merely things on top of the cake, because it's been a fantastic piece of work, and I'm really, grateful to you for your time and super proud of everything you've done. Thank you so
very
much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye now. Thank you.